Hi everyone, today we're going to paint this gorgeous green beetle. I'm going to start with my sketch already on the page. The link to the free downloadable and traceable sketch reference can be found in the description box below this video. So I have already sketched the sketch out using pencil, and then I've gone over the outline in a Pigma Micron black permanent liner pen in a very thin size 005. You'll see that I've used a very light hand and very light lines on the page just to get a basic outline done, and in places I've even used a staggered line so that the line is not continuous, just so that the line is not extremely prominent in the sketch but is there to guide me. I'm going to start by spraying my colors to activate them. I'm going to use my full set of Daniel Smith colors today, not all of the colors, but I've got a lot of greens, blues and yellows that I can use for just such a painting like this. If you don't have such an extensive range of colors, or you don't have the same colors that I do, it doesn't matter. You can really mix and match using whatever colors you've got on your palette, because this is not an extremely realistic set of colors that I'm using. I'm using more creative license here to make it vibrant and interesting. I'm going to prepare some colors so that they're in my palette, because I'm going to work wet and wet on my first layer here. So it just is more convenient if the colors are already prepared. I've got this very vibrant nickel Azo Yellow, which I don't use often because it is so vibrant, almost fluorescent, but I think it's going to be a really nice background yellow for this. You can see how bright it is. Then I think definitely a hooker's green. Then I think I'm looking for something, maybe I'll do some sap green, that's a different kind of green. Then I've got these gorgeous sort of turquoise and ultramarines that are on my palette here, waiting for just such a day as this. So this is Ultramarine Turquoise. You could mix a very similar color to this with things like Viridian and Cobalt Blue mix. Okay, I think I'll start with that and see how we go. I'm going to work wet and wet in this layer, so I'm going to put water down first and then just drop my colors in. The only area that I'm going to avoid for now is the area that is going to be my grayish black color, and that is in these two side panels here, as well as the little areas in between here. I'm going to avoid the rest. I'm going to put water there, as well as over the rest of the beetle. Maybe I will do it in sections, so I will start with the head and then this top area here, just to give myself time to play around a little bit, and then I'll come and do the bottom half. So for now, I'm going to put water into the top area. If my brush isn't completely clean and I've got a bit of pigment on it, it doesn't matter, because I'm going to be dropping in colors anyway. I'm using my silver black velvet brush. It is a size 8, so it's perfect for this sort of thing. The silver black velvet brushes are quite soft. They don't have much of a snap to them, so they do take a little bit of getting used to at the beginning, but I do find that they carry a lot of water, and I just enjoy using them. But any round brush in a size 6 to 10 would work here. Oh, this area here has also got color, so I'm just going to do that. So I'm going to do more than one layer here. I'll try and get away with 2. I'll see if 3 is necessary. So the first layer is going to be very light. I think I'm going to include just this little section over there, as well as this first one here, just really because they're connected. Okay, so I think I'm going to start with the yellow first, because that's the lightest color I've got here. And because my paper is so wet, you can see that the nickel Azo Yellow is really spreading, but that's fine for the first layer. I can see I've got a bit of pooling of water here, and although I want it wet, I don't want it pooling. I'm just going to dry and tap off my brush here and lift up a little bit of water. I don't want it to overflow into the next area. The water can flow to the outside of the area that you've wet, and that's where you can often see the pooling. Alright, so the next color, I think I'm going to do the hooker's green. I'm just trying to keep it symmetrical. Whatever I do on one side, I'll try and do it in roughly the same area on the other side. Alright, then now I'm going to go to the Sap Green. You'll see I'm not washing my brush off in between those two. They're both greens and they're going to mix on the page anyway. Now I'll use the Ultramarine Turquoise. This area I'll leave a little bit lighter because it is on top. Likewise, I think I'm going to lift, see if I can lift a highlight. So I'm just going to rinse off and dry my brush a little bit. See if I can lift a highlight in this area where it might be catching the lights. Alright, now I'm going to do maybe these middle sections here. So I'll lay down the clean water first. I'll start with the yellow first. That's spreading quite a lot. Obviously there's a lot of water on my page there. I'm maybe just going to lift a little. Let's do the hookers. And then the sap I'll do towards the outside. And then the ultramarine I'll do on both the left and the right hand edges. And now, because I lifted some paints and also because the paper is cold pressed, I've got some areas that didn't get any pigment, so I'm just going to shift the paint around now. And I think just in the very middle I'm going to add a little bit more hooker's green. Alright, now I'll do the little blocks around the side. Maybe I'll do the left ones first and then I'll do the right ones after. Oh, I realized I forgot these two at the bottom. I'll pick those up as well. I'll actually come back and do the darker bit just now, so I'm going to just to let the color settle a little bit. So let me work up in these on the right hand side now. So the left hand side is a little bit drier now, so I'm going to skip out Right, let me do a little bit of sap green and before I come to the turquoise. Maybe just around the very edge and bottom. Okay, and now I'll pick up the Ultramarine Turquoise. And I think I'm just going to do the bottom corner like that. That really allows the yellow that I put in higher up to really glow. Alright, let me see if anybody needs any help here. Just getting to the edge. Okay, I could do the legs, but I'm actually just going to let this dry completely. There's just too much risk that I'm going to put my hand in something and spread paint around that I don't want to. So I'm going to let that dry and then come back to it. That layer is completely dry now, and I'm just going to take the opportunity to put my first layer on all of the other bits, for which I'm going to use Payne's Grey. And I'm just going to mix the Payne's Grey up in a very weak consistency because of it being my base layer. I'll put it up on, I don't know what these things are called, the feelers, antlers, antenna, I'll do a bit on the eyes. Then I'll do the legs and then this middle section and then the legs on the right. Alright, I'm going to let that base layer dry now before I carry on. Right, that is all completely dry now. I have refreshed my water and made up some new mixes of each of my colors so that they are ready to go in a slightly thicker consistency than I did in the first layer because I'm looking for a bit more intensity here. I'm going to do the same as I did in the first layer and work section by section, working wet and wet, putting some water down first. I'm then going to drop my colors into the areas that are more intense and avoid the areas that are going to be the highlights to try and give a bit more depth and dimension to my painting. So I'll start in this top section. I'm going to leave the eyes because I accidentally put a green and yellow color on them in the first layer, and I want to reserve the eyes for doing something a bit different in the next layer. Alright, so as in the first layer, I will start with the yellow. So I'll leave the very center of the yellow to hopefully be the highlight, and maybe I'm actually going to drop this on the area around where I put the yellow earlier. And if I feel it's creeping in a bit far because there is quite a lot of water on the layer, I can try and lift there. This building up of layers one on top of the other is called glazing, and we do it so that we can get more dimension and vibrancy to our painting. And the technique that I'm currently using is called wet on wet because I'm putting a water layer down first and then dropping the color into that. Again, I'm just trying to match on both sides whatever I do on one side to go and do it in roughly the same place on the other side. Alright, I'm going to take the Ultramarine Turquoise now. There's going to be a bit of a shadow under here in the next layer, so I'm going to try and just stop that blue from drifting up to the top layer here. And I don't mind getting a bit of a highlight ridge along this top one here, because this will be the part of that shell that is sticking up towards the light. Alright, so I'll leave that top part of the shell for now. Let me go down to the bottom. I think this is all just looking a bit samey though. Maybe just going to try and drop a bit of yellow in there at the top, just for a bit of variation. Alright, so in the bottom I'll do the same as last time. I'll do the left part first, and then the center, and then the right. I think I'm actually happy with the lightest yellow parts. I'm not going to add anything there. I'd rather just push the darks a little bit darker. So I'm going to jump straight to the hooker's green and come down to the bottom. And I'm just going to prevent that from bleeding up to where the yellow is. And then in the very corner I will put the blue. Alright, it's just similar thing in the center. I'm just seeing if I need to tame anything here. Alright, let me work on the center now. Okay, I'm going to put the yellow on either side of where the yellow was before. Maybe just a bit more up here. Alright, let me put the hooker's green down. Okay, and then I'm just going to go straight into the blue and do that on the edges. There are some bits that I missed in the first layer. I'm just going to make sure I go to the edge here. Right, I'm going to do the right hand side now. And then drop in some blue. Right, I'll let that dry. Alright, that layer is completely dry now. Now I'm going to work from top to bottom and do my first layer of my more shadow colors. I'm going to start with these things again, and I'm going to work with Payne's Grey. I'm going to work wet on dry in this layer so that I can control where my color goes, get a little bit more intensity, and then build a bit more dimension. So I've got my Payne's Grey in a medium consistency here, and to try and get a curved look to these, I'm going to put a darker line on the outside of each segment. Working wet on dry means that I'm not pre-wetting the surface, and I'm going and putting the pigment straight onto the page. That means it will get a harder edge to it and will require that I do some blending to smooth it out. It was quite difficult to get any sort of blending on that first segment because it's so narrow, but this next one, because it's slightly wider, I'm going to just see if I can blend this color. But I want to leave the center light so that it gets that rounded three-dimensional look. You see that's all just blended together. So I'm going to see if I can lift the center. Cleaned and dabbed off my brush there. This little brush doesn't allow for much lifting. And now I will it's almost dry in the center, so I'm expecting very little blending. I'll just put a bit more dark on the outside there. Not wanting to make the same mistake, I'll dry off my brush. What I'm going to do in the eye now, I will work a little bit wet and wet here, because I think the eye will probably need an additional layer. So I'm going to wet the whole thing and then get a thicker consistency of the Payne's grey. I'm going to drop it in on the top right corner here and allow it to blend. I'm going to do this section first before I go to the right here. So I work from left to right. I'm going to mix up some indigo as my shadow color on the beetle's main body. Indigo is a very intense color and will be great for shadows here. I'm just mixing it to quite a creamy consistency there in the palette. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this indigo in this section here and this section here, avoiding the middle, and then I'm going to blend it outwards. I think I can put in a bit more. And then I'll get it in a very light consistency and just carry it on over here. I'm going to take it in quite a thick consistency here, put it up at the top and blend it down. Alright, let me go to the right here. I'm going to repeat what I did on the left. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do in this section here, I want to do a bit of a shadow under this area. Actually, I'm wondering if I should do that shadow. I'm going to do it on the top half, actually, because it would be this part of the shell will be casting a shadow on the bits underneath it. So let me start with that. I am going to work wet and wet just so that I get a bit of blending, but I'm going to work wet and wet with quite a thick consistency of the indigo. So I'm going to put water down above this line. Not too wet. I don't want the shadow color to blend very far at all. I'm just looking to not get a completely solid line. I'm taking that indigo in quite a thick consistency and I'm going to drop it along that line. And then I'm going to blend it. I'm just pushing it back a little bit because I don't want it blending that far. I'm going to mix in here a shadow color. The indigo is just a little bit too blue. I want to mix together indigo and Payne's grey, I think. Alright, next I'm going to do the shadow that's cast inside this area. So again, I'm going to put down a little bit of water first to the right of this line. I'm going to pick up this creamy consistency mix of my shadow color and drop it in around the left here. I want there to be quite a sharp contrast where I put this shadow color down, and I don't want to repeat this layer, so I will keep adding the shadow color and blending until I'm happy with the depth of the shadow. In the center here, I'm just going to fill in this crack with the shadow color, just wet on dry with the thicker consistency of the shadow color. Now I'm going to repeat that shadow on the right hand side. I'm going to do the same thing that I've done here with this shadow underneath this part of the shell here. So this top section will cast a shadow on the piece underneath. So I'm going to put water underneath this line here and then drop my shadow color in along the edge. Now you can see that there's this almost Y shape here. I'm going to extend this indigo down in a wet on wet shadow because I'm wanting it to blend out the same way that I've got the other colors here. So I'm going to put water down beyond the edge of that Y shape that I've got there. I'm going to take it all the way up to here. I'll use the bigger brush now to get that shadow color. I'll take it down to just about the halfway point here, fill in up to that Y, and then I'm going to let it blend and see what it does. And if I need to add anything more, maybe I'll angle it a little bit here. I want to keep that yellow that I've got there. It's quite wet, so it's probably still going to continue blending. I'm going to just spend some time, not move on just yet, keep an eye on this, because I also want to intensify the indigo down the center one more time. But I think it's just a bit wet now to do that because it's going to spread too far. So I'm just preserving the lighter highlights that I've got there, but I can see it's quite glistening still on the surface here. I'm just going to wait maybe a half a minute. I'm going to pick up that thicker consistency of the shadow color. I'll drop it in up here and down the center. You can see it's blending a lot slower now because the layer is much drier than when I started. It's a bit dry there, it didn't move at all. And I really want it dark as a focal point here. Maybe I'll take just the indigo. Again, I'm just going to keep my eye on that whilst it dries, that it doesn't bleed or make hard edges, because I've added quite a lot of pigment in the middle here. So there is a risk that I'll get a sharp defined edge here, which I don't want. So I'm just going to keep an eye on it, let it dry a little bit more before I move on. I suppose what I can do, I'm going to keep an eye on that, and I'm just going to do these two shadow areas here. I'm going to do a shadow on the top of each arc. So I can see a hard edge forming here, but that's fine. I don't want to overwork that area, but I am aware of it. Alright, so let me do something about these edges. I definitely don't want to go in with too much water, otherwise I'm going to exacerbate the problem. So I'm rinsing and dabbing with my brush, and then I'll just encourage a bit of blending here where there is a bit of a sharp edge. It's also lifting some of the color at the same time because my brush is quite dry. Right, I'm happy with that. Alright, let me do these legs on the left. I am going to do a similar thing to what I did up there. I am going to incorporate maybe a little bit of a yellow-green color as well, just so it's not all just grey. I'll use what I've already got here. That's the Hooker's Green. And then the Nickel Azo Yellow. Yeah, I'm happy with that. I'm going to put the yellow tint color down first, and then come back and do the shadow. So I'm just doing it on the top there, down the left here. I can blend it a little bit. I'll add some Payne's Grey to the edge of the shadow color here. Alright, I'm going to put some shadow in at the corner here, down the bottom, and then I'll blend it up. On this piece I'll do more shadow on the right. And I think there'd be a bit of a shadow in here. And I'll do the same thing on this leg. I will do the same thing with the legs on the right now. Alright, so I think the middle section is far enough away from what I've been working on that I can carry on here. So I am going to work in there's these sections to the beetle's body here. I'm going to work in every second one so that the color that I put down from the one doesn't bleed into the other, because I'm going to be trying to get a shadow gradient on each one. So let's start with the top one. That is the bigger one, and I'm firstly just going to mix up some more Payne's gray, because I'm going to need quite a lot for where I'm going, and I just want it to be ready. And I'm wanting it in that medium to thick consistency again. And then I'll just spray it here for when I need to take some more next. Alright, I'm going to rinse off my brush, and I'm going to work wet and wet in this top section. So this whole section here, I'm going to put water down. So maybe I'll start in these two areas here. That's where I think the shadow will be the thickest and the most intense. So picking up the Payne's grey on my smaller brush there, I'm going to drop it in. Yeah, this thicker consistency is more what I was going for. Then I'll blend it. Let me just get some in the middle here. So I want it to be light grey by the time I get to the bottom here, but I would still like a bit more of a gradient. So I'm going to blend this outwards, and if I need to, then I'll add more shadow colour up at the top. So I want it really intense in colour up here at the top, and then to form a gradient downwards. Alright, I think I'm confident enough to try and get a little bit of colour in here, but also if your brush isn't small enough, or you don't feel confident, or your hand is shaky, then you also can do it with black pen. And I might very well go over it with black pen later if it's not dark enough. Alright, so as I said, we're going to work in every second one. I'm also just making sure that I do get light at the edge here, otherwise I'm not going to get that contrast from one piece to the next. Alright, I think that's dry enough that it's not going to bleed down any further. So as I said, we're going to work in every second one, so I'm going to miss this section now and come to this one and do the same thing. I'm going to put some water down first and then put shadow colour at the top end. Then I'm going to do the dark section in the middle. And this one has ended up in this piece. This one is in the piece down here somehow. So I will just blend this and deal with that later. So now I will repeat the process for the remaining every second segment. Alright, so I'm going to wait for about 10 minutes just to let that dry, and then I'll come and do every second section. I think I want to just give his head a bit of a curve inwards, so I'm going to put shadow around the two side edges and blend it in. Okay, that's better. I'm now going to do the shadows. I've put a very light dotted line on my page, and that's also what I indicated on the downloadable sketch reference. But I'm going to have this shadow so light, I just want to erase it a little bit, just so that the dots are there as my guide, but I don't want them visible through the shadow. So I can see them, although you might not be able to see them. To do this shadow, I'm going to use a very, very weak mix of the Payne's grey. So weak that I think I'm going to transfer it into another well. I can always do a second layer of the shadow color, but I can't, to make it darker, but I can't make it lighter once it's down. So, right, I'm going to try like that and then make it darker if I wish to in an additional layer. It's often tempting to do the shadows too dark because we think that they must be darker than they are, but it's oftentimes that can be a bit too intense. Okay, I know it's going to dry lighter than that, but I'm going to leave it at that and then see what it looks like when it's dry. Alright, I think that's it for the shadows. I'm going to let that dry and see if I want to push that shadow any darker. Now that this is dry, I'm going to go over some areas of the sketch with a slightly thicker micron pen in a size 03 in any areas where I think that it could do with some thicker lines. So over here I am going to put a slightly thicker line on what is the shadow side. In my mind the light is probably coming a little bit from the right, so I'm just going to make the left side slightly heavier. I think this might be easier in a 0.5. So this is slightly thicker. So I'm just going to work around and just use the pen to help me get a little bit more dimension in some areas that I think could use it. This is entirely optional. If you don't have a pen or you don't want to do this step, then you don't have to. Alright, I'm happy with that. I'm going to remove the tape. And there's the final sketch. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please give it a like and let me know in the comments box what you'd like to see in the future. Until next time, bye for now.